Next up, we have a short message from Stephen Paice at Baillie Gifford. Welcome to the SOET family.
Hi, I'm Stephen Paice, Head of European Equities at Baillie Gifford. Through the last 100 years or so of being an independent partnership, as well as making many mistakes, we've come to believe that to generate extreme positive returns, we need to find and invest in the world's most exceptional growth companies and to support them for long periods of time, even as they transition from private to public markets. We've had the pleasure of co-investing with Atomico before, but this year we are also delighted to sponsor their State of European Tech report. This report, as previous editions have also done, shines a welcome light on the tremendous progress of Europe's tech ecosystem. Whether it's the number of companies reaching unicorn status or the increasingly supportive funding environment, we think that you'll agree that Europe's future has never looked as promising. This is our time to accelerate the revolution we are seeing in some industries and to help build a sustainable future. We hope you take as much inspiration from the report's findings as we do. There is still a lot of work to be done, but the combination of unprecedented levels of ambition and patient capital is a truly potent mix. Thank you. And now, on with the show.
Thank you so much, Stephen. One of the biggest stories this past year has been the continued rise of fintech, which has attracted the most investment and created more value than any other sector. And the company leading the way is based in Sweden, which is where we're headed next. And these two speakers need little in the way of introduction. Sebastian Siemiatkowski is the co-founder and CEO of Klarna, Europe's most valuable private tech company. And Niklas Zennström is one of the true pioneers of European tech, having co-founded Skype as well as Atomico. They sat down in Stockholm to talk about how Klarna became a global category leader and why its ambitions for the future are even greater.
Sebastian, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here in Klarna headquarters in Stockholm to share a little bit about the journey of scaling one of Europe's most successful tech company.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
The success you've had with Klarna is extraordinary, but I know also it wasn't always smooth sailing. And can you share a little bit with us how you went about to scale from first Sweden and then now becoming a global company?
When we started it very early, 2005, with 3 founders, we did a lot of sales. We're out there meeting clients, and we started this kind of snowball that started really rolling. And then as we were growing as a company and starting to reach like 1,000 people, it really changed. It put a very different type of requirements on ourselves as founders, as managers, and really kind of challenged us on like, how do you make a big company work? Like, I understand how to make a small company work, but a big company. And so in 2010 and 11, when we started going into new markets and so forth, was a time when I started getting nervous about the momentum in the business. I started feeling that we weren't taking decisions as fast, we were growing political, we were hiring a lot of senior executives that were supposed to come in and fix everything. And you could feel that momentum was slowing down. So it was a quite challenging time, but obviously we were very focused on still kind of learning, experimenting, and trying to find a way forward. And it took us I would say about 3 years until 15, really, when my second co-founder left, that we started kind of finding a new way of working internally, and then that kind of laid the foundation for the continuous growth.
The big thing for me the last 18 months or so, or 2 years maybe, has been the success of the US, which now is the largest market for Klarna. Was there a moment or pivotal point where you realized how you could make that really big?
We launched in the US in 15, and at that point of time, it was more just to put like a flag there and say like, we're going to do something, but we didn't really had yet like a clear idea of what the opportunity would look like and how we should create the perfect product market fit and so forth. My biggest challenge was that I felt that I could go and speak to a merchant and come back with an idea or do something, but then I was going back to an organization in Sweden that, in order to deliver a new feature or a new service could take up to a year. And I realized that with that pace, we would just never break through in that market. So in 15 to 18, I really spent my main focus on kind of really, that was the time when we really started finding a way of working. We had rehauled a lot of the technology. We got the right managers in place, and so we were well equipped. And then in 2018, I remember going to the US with the management team, and we kind of said, like, this is it. Like, it's either now we're going to make it work or not. And so then we just, we just dropped everything, and it was just 100% focused on the US after that. And that has really, given results now. But it was fairly, I would say, I felt fairly dark in the beginning because we had some strong competition. They were, slightly ahead of us, and so it was. It required a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work to overcome that.
And given the size of the U.S. market, and typically, if you win the U.S. market, then it's easier to become the global company.
Right.
In hindsight now, would it have been better to just, when you started the company from the beginning, or at some point you just kind of pick up everything and just move the whole company to the U.S.? Or do you think that scaling a company from Stockholm and Europe is actually pretty okay?
I think that is something that has changed massively, right? So when we started Klarna in 2005, really the only person we could look to that had done something on a global scale was you, right? I mean, you were a massive inspiration for us with what you had done with Skype, and because it was the only European example of a company that had started here and that had that global success. And I think also when I look at my first years, like 2005 to maybe 12, at that point of time, the advice that we were getting on how to grow and scale the company was of very poor quality. So we were poorly advised by so many people that were involved with the company at that point of time. Board members that claimed to have experience, people and so forth. They had simply never scaled at this rate, because it hadn't happened at that time. There were very few companies that had done that, so they had a very poor understanding of what that meant and what the challenges and how you needed to go about. And I think at that point of time, in San Francisco, if you were 2005 to 12, you already had Google, you had a couple of really successful companies, and so there was more maturity, more understanding of what the requirements were, what kind of people you need, how you need to operate, and so forth to be able to scale at that rate. And I think we were struggling with that. Now it's changed massively, right? Because now there is in Europe a number of companies that done really well and has scaled, so that experience exists. And at the same point of time, what's happened in San Francisco is that it's totally overhyped, right? So engineers there work for maximum 1 year at a company and then they move on to another. Actually, most companies that I speak to today that are entrepreneurs and that are in Silicon Valley, the entrepreneur sits in Silicon Valley and then all the engineers are in Ukraine, right? Yeah. So really, it's just the entrepreneur that sits there. But so I think that today we feel that being in Europe has a massive advantage. We have access to fantastic engineering talent across the continent, and it's kind of a healthier environment to operate in. Which actually allows us to be successful in many markets.
Well, thank you for that. And it's true that Silicon Valley had so many role models, and now you're one of the role models here. Let's move a little bit to the buy now, pay later model, which is everyone is so excited about. It's the fastest growing payment method, because this was actually based a little bit on some Swedish spending patterns. So tell us a little bit about when you started, what was the kind of the problem that you tried to solve?
The kind of 2004 and 5 when we started Klarna was a fun time because there was a lot of e-commerce entrepreneurs out there, and they all were starting these small companies, and they realized that they could buy Google AdWords really cheaply and sell something, right? And some of them developed to amazing companies. So it was a kind of a fun time, but we realized at that point of time that the usage of a debit card online, because Sweden was a debit card market, it basically asks the consumer to send money to the merchant, and then hopefully receive the product that they saw in the picture, which at the point of time, especially then, people were very nervous. Would I receive this? People didn't trust the internet, etc. And so the idea, very basic concept was why wouldn't the consumer get the products first, touch and feel them before they pay for them? And that was it. And it turned out that both consumers preferred that because they felt more safe and it was more easy and so forth. But also merchants as a consequence could see more sales and growing faster. So that was kind of that was the basic form of it. Now what has accelerated Klarna and why you're seeing this buy now pay later is because in the US and in the UK there's a shift away from credit cards towards debit cards So more people have debit cards than ever, which is great because people should have debit cards, not credit cards.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. But then when they shop online, they struggle with debit cards. And so, our services solve for that.
And today, Klarna is a $46 billion company. Of course, it's a textbook example of disruption. But it also feels to me when I follow you, as a founder and as a company, that the more successful you are, the more ambitious you get. Is that accurate?
Well, I think yes, and I think to some degree, obviously you move the step of what you want to accomplish, and you get more, bold about what you're trying to do. But I also think to some degree that, it is a very interesting market because we're in this $1 trillion market called retail banking, and it hasn't really cared about its customer, and it doesn't have modern technology, and so like to your point, all of the prerequisites are really there, which is super exciting, and at the same point in time, I kind of recognize it, and I think to me maybe more because I was there at the early days of e-commerce. I remember when we first raised money for Klarna, some investors told us people are never going to shop clothing online because that was the sentiment in 2004. Like that was still the sentiment, right? So and I recognize, and then e-commerce came along, and then Zalando started growing, and everyone was screaming at Kinnevik that it was crazy that they had this valuation because it didn't make sense. And then wow, suddenly Zalando was worth a lot of money. So the point is that it's coming now. You can see this shift, and people always there's a hype, and then comes a down, and then comes a hype. Yeah. But the shift, but the trend doesn't it doesn't change. E-commerce is eating more and more retail, and digital banking will eat more and more of the traditional banks.
And you came into this as a payment service. What I liked about what you guys did early on, that you said we're going to be a bank. Mm-hmm. So you're taking an approach now to transform retail banking coming from an entry point of payments, which I like as an investor because your unit economics are so much better than the other entrants.
Yes. No, I think that's the case, and I think that, in essence, if you look at banking, it really is saving, lending, and payments, right? Those are the three core elements of what it's been about, and I think the payments is a very natural entry point, and that's where we're going to be very, very focused.
So one thing we set out to do with Atomico when we started was to build a venture firm that could be there for founders in the long term and hopefully add some value to the founders in their journey and have empathy with them. Is that something that is in your mind as a founder? Is that something that's useful, or is it about raising money at the highest valuation?
Well, first and foremost, it's definitely not about the highest valuation. I did that mistake when we took in money in 2010. We had gone from Sequoia coming in, at $100 million, and then just 1 year later we did $1 billion, and that was just too fast. What I learned from that is that it wasn't great because we came into a situation where we had a too high valuation, and the latest investors were not too happy about it because they realized that it was going to take time to grow, and we started seeing a lot of cracks in the growth of the company. And so I really learned from that it's not about the highest valuation. It's about having, people that you trust, that have integrity, that are going to support you through the ups and downs, and preferably, so you got to find those people, and you got to be willing to take them on, not always at the highest valuation. And that's the advice that I give to other founders today as well. There's a big difference between investors in their integrity, and they're willing to back you, etc. And then secondly to that, providing advice or providing additional, other support services and so forth. That varies a lot because that always comes back to what kind of people do you have in your organization? In Atomico, you've always had this guy, recruitment.
Dan.
Dan, who's amazing. And we've had a lot of help from him. So but it becomes very individual. It's really about your ability to attract the people that can really, give proper and good advice, right? And that's hard to judge as an entrepreneur early on when you talk to a firm, but it matters. So I think it's the trustworthiness and the integrity of the people that you work with.
Silicon Valley can be sometimes, maybe not so much anymore, but it was a time when they were very critical about copycats and European copycats. Right. And it's funny now to see that maybe the tide has turned where you have companies like some of the big Silicon Valley companies like Square, Affirm, and even Apple, to some extent, are following and being inspired by what you guys have done in Klarna. How do you feel about that, and how are you going to stay ahead? Because some of them are pretty big companies.
First of all, obviously it's flattering to some degree, and then it's also frustrating to another. But I think like my biggest frustration actually was that when we were not active on the US market, right? That meant that we were coming with ideas. We were trying to come with new ideas, and it's hard. It's hard to innovate, and it's hard to stay front. And when you did that, and then so other companies implementing the same things in the US, but you're not active in that market. Wow, that's a massive frustration. Yeah. Nowadays, at least, like we can lead ourselves in the US with our offering. So now it's more like, well, that's just how it's going to play out, right? Like people are going to copy what you do. I find that Silicon Valley still, however, is very centric on itself. And actually, that's one of its weaknesses, to be honest. Like, I mean, even if like Apple now introduces buy now, pay later, as I said in an interview, like when is it going to come to Europe? I don't know, like 10 years from now, like 15 years from now? Like, it's like the Europe is as big as a market as the US. So.
And you've been at this now for 16 years, and everyone wants to know what's next for Klarna. So can you share with us your vision for the future?
So I think global presence is very key. That's going to continue. And with global, I mean maybe, ex-China, because China is a very different animal. I think the second thing is that buy now, pay later for us is a fantastic feature. It offers a lot of value, but obviously it's just a feature. So at the end of it, it's like people come into these checkouts, they have all these buttons, PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, this Pay, whatever. And then they have this Klarna button. And I mean, the key question right now that I ask everyone internally is like, why would anyone click this button instead of the other buttons? Like, what's the value? So what is the value creating for customers? How is it, improving their lives? How are you saving them time, saving them money, making them less worried about their finances? So I think like keeping really focused at that. But right now I feel like more than ever, it's not about like, because we did a pivot, we've done 2 pivots, one around 10 and one around 15. But now it's not about that. Now it's just like keep our heads down and just keep extremely focused and just kind of continue doing what we're doing, because we're at the right trajectory. But again, we have the massive benefit of this tremendous addressable market, right? Like, it's just limitless, right? It's just so huge.
Congratulations to the success, and we're so privileged to be part of your journey. So
Well,
thank you for that.
Thank you for supporting us.
Thank you for spending the time with us, Sebastian.
Thank you.